April 16th, 1947, 8:00 in the morning. A man arrives at the gates of Auschwitz. He is 47 years old. He is wearing prison clothes. His hands are cuffed behind his back. He arrived by car under armed guard, transferred from Warsaw the night before, and held in Block 11 until this morning. Block 11 was the building the prisoners called the Death Block. It was the place inside this camp where prisoners suspected of resistance were interrogated, where they were tortured, where the lucky ones were shot in the courtyard, where the unlucky ones were sent somewhere worse. He spent the night in one of its cells. He knows exactly what Block 11 is. He built this place. Now it is 8 in the morning, and Rudolf Höss, the longest-serving commandant of Auschwitz concentration camp, the man responsible for the industrialized murder of more than 1 million human beings on these grounds, is walking back through the camp he once commanded. He asked for a glass of coffee before they let him out. They gave it to him, he drank it. Then they walked him through the main camp street. And here is the thing that makes this moment unlike any other execution in the post-war trials. The route from the former headquarters building to the gallows passes the crematoria. It passes what remains of the gas chambers. The man being walked to his death is being walked past the place where he sent over 1 million people to theirs. He did not break stride. Witnesses present that morning described Höss as calm, more than calm. Energetic, he walked, according to contemporaneous accounts, almost strutting, with rapid, confident steps that surprised the people watching him. A former guard named Stanislaw Hans was there. He said afterward, when they were leading him to the gallows, Höss looked calm. I thought as he climbed to the gallows, up the steps, knowing him to be a Nazi, a hardened party member, that he would say something, like make a statement to the glory of the Nazi ideology that he was dying for. But no, he didn't say a word. And during the execution, Hans added, "You thought, one life for so many millions of people. Is that not too little?" That question has never been answered. It hangs in the air over everything that follows. This is the story of Rudolf Höss, who he was before the war, what he built at Auschwitz, what it was like inside the thing he built, what he wrote in his cell while he waited to die, how he was found hiding on a farm in northern Germany under a dead man's name, what the trial revealed about a man who described murdering children the way an engineer describes a logistics problem, and what it meant that on the morning of April 16th, 1947, the man who had sent over 1 million people to their deaths in gas chambers was walked past those gas chambers on his way to a small wooden gallows built specifically for him. One gallows, one man, one short rope, 10 minutes of dying, and not one word from him. November 25th, 1901, Baden-Baden, Germany, Rudolf Franz Ferdinand Höss was born the eldest child and only son of a strict Catholic family. His father was a former army officer who had served in German East Africa and returned to run a tea and coffee business. He raised his son on military discipline and deep religious conviction. He had made a vow that Rudolf would enter the priesthood. Rudolf was baptized, catechized, confirmed. He was a lonely child with few friends his own age, spending most of his time in the company of adults. He was, by his own account in the autobiography he later wrote in prison, close to no one. He was raised to obey authority absolutely. His father said one must obey whoever is in charge. This was not qualified, whoever is in charge. His father died when Rudolf was a teenager. The priesthood died with him. The First World War had started. Rudolf was 15 when he enlisted. He served on the Turkish front. By 17, he was the youngest non-commissioned officer in the German army, decorated with the Iron Cross first and second class. He had been in combat before he was old enough to shave. He had learned that war was not an aberration. It was an environment. It was a place where obedience and efficiency produced results, where the man who could suppress sentimentality and focus on the task produced the best outcomes. Germany surrendered in 1918. Höss came home to a country that had, in his view, been stabbed in the back by weakness, by defeatism, by the forces that he and every other young nationalist believed had betrayed the German army from within. He joined one of the paramilitary groups fighting communism in the Baltic states. He found his way into the nationalist underground. And in early 1922, through the Freikorps, he was introduced to Adolf Hitler at a meeting in Munich. He joined the Nazi Party immediately. He said afterward that Hitler's first speech removed all his doubts about where Germany's future lay. He became member number 3240. He was 20 years old. A year later, in 1923, he participated in the murder of a man named Walter Kadow, a former Freikorps member suspected of informing on a nationalist operative to French occupation authorities. Höss and several others beat Kadow, cut his throat, and shot him. He was convicted and sentenced to 10 years of hard labor. He was released after 5 years under a general amnesty. He spent the years after his release working on farms, living the Blut and Boden ideology, blood and soil, the Nazi glorification of agricultural life. He married Hedwig Hensel in 1929. They had 5 children. He was, by every account from the people who knew him in these years, a gentle, hard-working farmer who loved his family and was kind to the animals in his care. He had no other visible life. He was simply a man on a farm. In 1934, Heinrich Himmler persuaded him to join the SS. He was assigned to the concentration camp system. He spent 4 years at Dachau, then went to Sachsenhausen as adjutant. He absorbed the camp system's logic, its rhythms, its bureaucratic architecture of dehumanization and death. He learned to manage prisoners as a resource. He learned to think about human beings in categories of utility and liability. He was thorough, organized, relentlessly loyal to whatever authority stood above him. He was promoted. He was noticed. And on May 1, 1940, Heinrich Himmler appointed Rudolf Höss as the first commandant of a new camp being built in western Poland, in a converted Austro-Hungarian army barracks near a town the Germans called Auschwitz. The camp, initially designed to hold Polish political prisoners, was a cluster of brick buildings surrounded by electrified wire in a marshy plain south of Krakow. The first prisoners arrived in June 1940. Polish political prisoners, then Soviet prisoners of war. Höss expanded the facility. He added barracks, added wire, added personnel. He visited the Treblinka extermination camp in spring 1942 to study its killing methods. He found them unsatisfactory. Treblinka used carbon monoxide. Höss thought it was inefficient. The capacity was too low. The process too slow. He returned to Auschwitz and authorized the use of Zyklon B, a crystallized prussic acid developed as a commercial pesticide. On September 3, 1941, the first experimental gassing took place in the detention cells of Block 11. The subjects were 850 Soviet prisoners of war and sick prisoners. The Zyklon B was dropped through the ventilation. The results, in Höss's own clinical language, were satisfactory. He wrote about this experiment in his autobiography, which he composed in his Polish prison cell in 1946, at the request of his captors. He wrote, "The gassing was carried out in the detention cells of Block 11. Protected by a gas mask, I watched the killing myself. In the crowded cells, death came instantaneously the moment the Zyklon B was thrown in. A short, almost smothered cry, and it was all over. I must even admit that this gassing set my mind at rest, for the mass extermination of the Jews was to start soon, and at the time neither Eichmann nor I was certain how these mass killings were to be carried out. It would be easy to gas them, and it would spare the men who would otherwise have had to carry out the shooting." He called it humane. He called it a relief. He described the problem he had solved, which was how to murder thousands of people per day without it requiring individual acts of killing that might cause psychological difficulty for the men doing the killing. Zyklon B was his engineering solution to a staffing problem. That is how he described it. That is what he actually thought. By mid-1942, the killing infrastructure at Auschwitz-Birkenau was fully operational. The camp Hetschers had built now had 4 large crematoria, each containing gas chambers capable of killing 2,000 people simultaneously. 2 or 3 trains arrived daily, each carrying 2,000 prisoners. They were unloaded at the Birkenau platform, separated into lines by SS doctors conducting what was called selection. Those deemed fit for labor went to the barracks. The elderly, the infirm, children under 14, and mothers who refused to be separated from their children went to the left. To the left meant to the gas chambers. They were told they were going to shower facilities. They were given soap. They walked down a ramp. The doors closed. Zyklon B crystals dropped through openings in the roof. 3 to 15 minutes later, the screaming stopped. That is how Höss knew when they were dead. They stopped screaming. He wrote about this too. He wrote that he sometimes felt weak, physically weak, when he had to push hundreds of screaming, pleading children into the gas chambers. He wrote that he always felt ashamed of this weakness afterward, because Adolf Eichmann had explained to him that it was especially the children who had to be killed first, that it was illogical to kill a generation of adults and leave behind a generation who would be the potential avengers of their parents. This made rational sense to Höss. He reminded himself of the logic. He pushed through the weakness. He pushed the children in. One woman, he wrote, stopped as she walked past him at the gas chamber entrance. She pointed to her 4 children, helping the smallest ones over the rough ground. She whispered to him, "How can you bring yourself to kill children?" He did not answer her. He did not explain. He kept his face blank and let her walk in with her children. He wrote about this woman. He remembered her. He did not know her name. During his tenure as Commandant, Auschwitz received transports from across occupied Europe. French Jews, Dutch Jews, Greek Jews, Hungarian Jews, Polish Jews, Czechoslovak Jews, Belgian Jews, Italian Jews, Norwegian Jews, German Jews. The trains came from every direction. In May 1944, in what became known as Operation Höss, a special name given because of the extraordinary pace of killing required, Höss returned to Auschwitz to personally oversee the extermination of Hungary's Jewish population. He had been temporarily reassigned to administrative duties in 1943, but was brought back specifically for this operation. Between May and July 1944, approximately 400,000 Hungarian Jews arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau. The killing rate reached 10,000 people per day. The crematoria could not handle the volume. Bodies were burned in open pits. The smoke was visible for miles. The smell was part of the air across the surrounding region. The people of Auschwitz and the surrounding towns could smell what was happening. Everyone knew. While this was taking place, Höss lived at 88 Legionau Street. A villa. A family home with a garden and a greenhouse and horses and a swimming pool fed by a stream diverted for the purpose. His wife Hedwig kept the house and raised their 5 children. The youngest, Annegret, was born at Auschwitz in November 1943. The children played with turtles and cats. They swam in the river. They had a dog and a pony. The family ate well, fed partly from the garden and partly from goods looted from the prisoners. Brigitte Hertz, one of the daughters, described her father decades later as the nicest father in the world. She described Christmas mornings, real cookies under the tree, her father letting her come downstairs early. She described a loving, attentive man who made time for his family. She described this from a house that was separated from the gas chambers of Auschwitz by a concrete wall and a row of tall trees. The wall was not high enough to block the smoke. Nothing was high enough to block the smell. Brigitte Hertz said later that she had not known what was happening on the other side of the wall. This is what she said. What she knew and what she chose not to know are questions that only she can answer. Her mother Hedwig said after the war that those were the happiest years of her life. At Auschwitz, the happiest years of her life. In January 1945, the Soviet army was approaching. Höss evacuated the camp, ordered the destruction of records, organized death marches of prisoners west into Germany. He disguised himself. Himmler had given him papers in the name of a German Navy sailor, Franz Lang, recently killed in action. He joined a naval school. He moved his family to the Flensburg region of northern Germany, near the Danish border. He worked as a farm laborer. He grew a beard. He was a farmer again. He had always been comfortable as a farmer. He was, by instinct and by training, a man who could find the right rhythm of whatever environment he was placed in and perform it convincingly. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. Höss was somewhere on a farm near the Danish border, calling himself Franz Lang. He had escaped. He was invisible. For nearly 10 months, the man who had murdered more people than almost any individual in human history was working the land and eating meals and sleeping in a farm in northern Germany, and nobody knew who he was. What found him was a ring. A British officer named Hans Alexander was assigned to the War Crimes Investigation Team in 1945. He was 28 years old. He was a German Jew who had fled Berlin with his family in 1936, one step ahead of the Gestapo. He had joined the British Army, served through the war as an intelligence officer, and by 1945, he was conducting interrogations and pursuing war criminals across the British occupation zone. He had a photograph of Höss. He had a list of names. He knew that Höss was hiding somewhere. He began tracking backward through the people who knew him: guards, subordinates, prisoners, and eventually Hedwig Höss. He found her and put her in custody. He questioned her. She said her husband was dead. He didn't believe her. He questioned her son, Klaus. He questioned her again. She gave him nothing. Then, on the evening of March 11, 1946, Alexander heard a train passing behind the prison building where Hedwig was held. He walked into her cell. He told her that train was going to take her son Klaus to Siberia if she didn't give him what he needed. He left a pencil and a piece of paper on the table and walked out. When he came back, the paper had an address written on it: Hans Peter Hansen's farm in Gottrapel. Name: Franz Lang. Alexander assembled 25 soldiers and drove to Gottrapel in the dark. They arrived after midnight. A knock on the barn door. A man in pajamas who called himself Franz Lang answered. Alexander asked for his papers. The man produced them. Franz Lang, temporary card number B22595. Alexander looked at the man's hand. He saw a wedding ring. He said, "Take it off." The man said it was too tight, impossible to remove. Alexander said, "Then I'll cut your finger off." The man removed the ring. Inside the band, inscribed in the gold, Rudolf and Hedwig. The Commandant of Auschwitz had been identified by a love inscription on his wedding ring. The soldiers dragged him to a slaughter table in the barn. They beat him with axe handles. The doctor stopped them before they killed him. Höss was loaded into the jeep and driven to the prison at Heide. 4 days later, he signed a written confession. He was Rudolf Höss. He had supervised the murder of countless Jews at Auschwitz. He confirmed it in writing without significant coercion. He had apparently decided in those 4 days that there was nothing left to conceal. The evidence was everywhere. The camp still existed. The crematoria still existed. The records, or what remained of them, still existed. There were survivors in the hundreds of thousands who had seen him. There was no version of the future in which Rudolf Höss was anyone other than Rudolf Höss. He was taken to Nuremberg. He testified as a defense witness at the International Military Tribunal on April 15, 1946, called by the lawyer for Ernst Kaltenbrunner. It was meant to be testimony that reduced Kaltenbrunner's culpability by showing that Höss had acted independently. Instead, Höss delivered a forensic account of the entire killing apparatus of Auschwitz that stunned the courtroom into silence. He testified that he had overseen the gassing of approximately 2.5 million people and the deaths of another 500,000 from starvation and disease, for a total of roughly 3 million. Later historical research has established the number as approximately 1 million. The discrepancy reflecting the destruction of records and Höss's own tendency to round the numbers in a direction that made the operation sound more impressive. But even the lower number remains incomprehensible. 1.1 million, stated in a courtroom by the man who organized the killing, with the same bureaucratic precision he would have used to report the camp's food supply logistics. He was extradited to Poland on May 25, 1946, held in Polish custody. Tried by the Supreme National Tribunal of Poland, His trial ran from March 11th to March 29th, 1947. The evidence was overwhelming and was largely supplied by Höss himself. He had written his autobiography at Polish request. He had written detailed accounts of the killing process, the gas chambers, the selections, the crematoria, the Sonderkommando prisoners forced to work in the crematoria, the bodies, the gold extracted from teeth, the hair shaved from corpses. He had written about standing in the crematoria watching the furnaces and thinking about efficiency improvements. He had written about his children playing in the garden 50 meters away while the chimneys burned. He wrote about visiting women selected for death and thinking to himself, "This is your fate, but it has nothing to do with me." He had developed a mental partition between the man who tucked his children in and the man who ran the gas chambers. He described this partition as a professional necessity. He did not describe it as monstrous. He described it the way a surgeon might describe not bringing the operating room home with him. He asked the court, at the end of the proceedings, for permission to do two things. He wanted to send his wedding ring back to his wife. He wanted to send his family a farewell letter. Both requests were granted. He wrote to Hedwig on April 11th, 1947, 5 days before the execution. He told her that the entire ideology he had believed so firmly and unswervingly had been based on completely wrong premises. He said he had been deceived. He said he was sorry. He asked the Lord God to forgive him one day. He asked the Polish people for forgiveness. He also wrote, in the same prison period, an account of the emotional weakness he had felt when pushing children into the gas chambers. He had felt it every time. He had always overcome it. He had always reminded himself of the logic, the necessity, the order, and pushed them in. On Good Friday, April 4th, 1947, he asked to see a Catholic priest. The authorities had difficulty finding one who spoke German. He remembered the name of a Jesuit priest he had once encountered, a Father Władysław Lorn, whom he had once spared from deportation. Lorn was found in Krakow, praying at the Shrine of Divine Mercy. He came. On April 10th, he heard Höss's confession. On April 11th, Höss received Holy Communion. He knelt in his cell afterward and wept. He had returned at the very end to the church his father had raised him in, the church he had abandoned in 1922 when he met Hitler and decided that the Nazi Party was a better path to obedience than God. The sentence had been pronounced on April 2nd, death by hanging. The execution was originally scheduled for April 14th, but had to be postponed. The Polish authorities feared that if Höss was transferred through the town of Auschwitz, the residents would attempt to lynch him. The townspeople knew what had been done on their doorstep. They had smelled the smoke for years. So the transfer was conducted differently, at night, with tight security. German prisoners of war erected the gallows at dawn on April 16th, on the grounds of the former Auschwitz I camp, adjacent to Crematorium 1. The gallows was small, a short drop apparatus with a trapdoor and a stool, built for one person. No trapdoors for multiple condemned. No row of nooses. One rope. One man. One crematorium next to the gallows as witness. Approximately 100 people attended. Former prisoners. Polish government officials. A photographer named Stanisław Dąbrowski. A press photographer whose images were subsequently locked in a safe at the Polish Justice Ministry and not released for decades. 11 prints survive. The negatives disappeared. At 8 o'clock in the morning, Höss was brought from Block 11 to the camp headquarters building. He asked for coffee. They brought it. He drank it quietly. Then they led him out, and he began walking. Through the main camp street. Past the wire that had been electrified when he commanded this place. Past the barracks that had held hundreds of thousands of people over the years of the camp's operation. Past Crematorium first, which still stood, which would later become the site of a permanent memorial and museum, which you can visit today, where the gas chamber and cremation ovens remain as they were in 1945. He walked past it. His hands were cuffed behind his back, which meant he could not fully stride, but witnesses said he moved quickly, almost strutting. He said nothing. He looked straight ahead. The gallows stood in a small courtyard, a few dozen yards from the crematorium, A prosecutor read the sentence aloud. The priest, Father Tadeusz Zaremba, a Salesian from Owitzim, approached and began to pray. Since Höss's hands were cuffed behind him, the executioners had to help him climb onto the stool above the trapdoor. They positioned him. The hangman placed the noose around his neck. Adjusted it himself, moving his head slightly to settle the rope. That small movement, that adjustment of his own noose, is perhaps the most striking detail in the eyewitness accounts. Not a flinch, not a prayer, a technical adjustment. As if he were setting a knot on a piece of equipment, the stool was pulled. His body struck the trapdoor and fell. The rope snapped taut. The short drop method was used, meaning the fall was not long enough to reliably break the neck. Death came by strangulation. The priest began to recite the prayer for the dying. The clock read 10:08 in the morning. A physician pronounced Rudolf Höss dead at 10:21. It had taken 13 minutes. No last words. No statement. No Heil Hitler. No apology to the faces in front of him. No acknowledgement of the crematoria 10 meters away. Nothing, just the adjustment of the noose, and then the drop, and then 13 minutes of silence. His remains were cremated. The ashes were scattered in the forest. There is no grave. There is no marker. The man who had designed and operated the largest killing center in human history was disposed of as the humans he murdered had been disposed of. Ashes scattered, the execution of Rudolf Höss was the last public execution in Poland. What he left behind was more than the camp and its death toll, which historians have established at approximately 1 million people, a number so large it resists comprehension. He left behind the autobiography, Commandant of Auschwitz, published first in Polish in 1951, then in the original German in 1956. It has been read by historians, psychologists, criminologists, and ordinary people for nearly 70 years, and the question it raises has never been resolved. The question is not whether Höss was evil. That is not a complex question. The question is whether he was unusual. Whether the psychology that produced him, the combination of absolute obedience to authority, total emotional compartmentalization, professional pride in efficiency, and ideological conviction that overrode every other moral input, was specific to him, or whether it is, under the right conditions, available to almost anyone. His daughter Brigitte moved to the United States after the war. She worked in a fashion salon in Northern Virginia. For decades, no one who knew her knew who her father had been. She described him, when finally interviewed in 2013, as the nicest father in the world. She said there must have been two sides to him, the one she knew and then another. She never read his autobiography. She said it didn't interest her. Her youngest sister Annegret was born at Auschwitz in November 1943, while the gas chambers were running at full capacity. Her birth was registered in Auschwitz. She grew up and died in October 2023, having spent her life with the knowledge of where she was born and who had been there with her. She gave no public interviews. The villa at 88 Legionau Street, where Hedwig Höss had kept her house and her garden and her greenhouse while the chimneys burned 50 meters away, was acquired in recent years by an NGO called the Counter-Extremism Project. It has been opened as a museum and educational space. You can walk through the kitchen where Rudolf Höss drank his coffee in the mornings before going to work. You can stand in the garden where the children played with turtles and cats. The concrete wall is still there. The trees are still there, and beyond the wall, a short walk away, Crematorium I still stands. The gas chamber still stands. The ovens are still there. The gallows that killed Höss is there too. Reconstructed to show exactly where it stood on April 16, 1947. Small, simple, a wooden frame with one short rope, one stool, a trapdoor designed to drop one man. A man who walked briskly to his death, who asked for coffee first, who adjusted his own noose, who did not say a word, who had spent 5 years building and operating the largest murder machine in human history, and who walked through it one final morning with the confident stride of someone who had never doubted that what he was doing was correct, and then stood on a stool, while a priest prayed for his soul and a physician waited to pronounce him dead. One life, Stanislaw Hans had said, one life for so many millions. He did not claim it was enough. He did not claim it was justice. He only said it was what happened. The rope did the rest.